I started to speak to the schools, junior and seniors, and the last time I did it was a bunch of 8th graders. And the reception that I got was unbelievable. How they listened and would come up to me and say, you know, you taught us a lesson. So I've just been doing it. I did it at resident of Brooksby. I've done it there. And some of the towns around here where I've been asked to speak. It was very interesting how I ended up here today, sitting in a doctor's office in Peabody, and a gentleman sat next to me and started questioning me because I had that World War II veterans hat there. And it led from one thing to another, and here I am today. A little preliminary to getting, before I get to Dachau. Ended up in Camp Gruber, Oklahoma. And I walked into the orderly room, and there I met a burly master sergeant. Looked just like Sarge out of Beetle Bailey. From western Oklahoma. And he took a look at my orders and he said, you're AWOL. This was not a place, first thing out of his words, I was AWOL. I said, Sergeant, here are my orders, I'm here at time. He says, I don't care what the orders say, you're on AWOL. I got the message. As a, you know, I was a little old private. He says, you're assigned to the detail section. Well, that sounded like I was going to be on garbage detail and latrine duty for the rest of my life. So says, Corporal, take him down to the detail section. And I get down there and I met another sergeant, who, by the way, was a sweetheart of a guy. And he says, yes. I said, what is the detail section? He says, you're going to be assigned to a lieutenant and another enlisted man into a forward observer section. That didn't sound so good to me. I said, are you telling me that I'm going to be out there with a couple of guys directing artillery fire? Yeah, that's what you're going to do. I said, I don't know anything about it. He said, you better learn in a hurry because we're going overseas. And I had a crash course in it. We left from Gruber in early December to New York. It was Camp Kilmer at the time. And got our final shots and stuff. And in late December, right after Christmas, we headed for France. Went to Hoboken, and my first taste of what was ahead of me came at Hoboken. We got off the train, and they started forming up on the platform, all these young kids, 18, 19, 20 years old, heavily armed, going overseas. And another train came in across the platform and was full of civilians heading for another ferry across, going to work in Manhattan. And I'd say 95% were women. And as I looked up through the train window, they were all crying. This was the time of the bulge. And they knew better than we did where we were going. It was a little bit of a wake-up call. When we got to the ship across the harbor in the battery, we started going down the gangways, and I thought it was never going to end. Finally, we could go no farther. And there was a sailor standing there, and I said to him, you know, what's going to happen if we're hit? He says, you don't have a thing to worry about. Oh, that sounded pretty good. I took a couple of steps, and I turned around, and I said, what do you mean? He says, you'll never get out. Lesson number 2. We went across the Atlantic down to Cape Hatteras, winter storm. Some guys, I think, are still under some of those bunks from seasickness. Went through Gibraltar, landed at a place called Marseille. Put us on a plateau, which was the coldest place I've ever been. Frozen ground. We had 2-man pup tents. Tried to get the stakes in the ground, you couldn't do it. Got some rocks to hold, and the whole place must have had every rock in France was open. Impossible. Well, we got all our equipment and the guns, and we headed up the Rhone Valley. The 3 of us, we had a Jeep of our own. And this caravan went up the Rhone Valley towards Lyon. And along the way, we started to see the ravages of war. Burned out tanks. Sobering thing of seeing a rifle stuck in the ground with a German helmet on top as a marker. Went through Lyon, Dachau, Epinal. And once again, the Army in its wisdom, this convoy goes right past a brand new GI cemetery in Epinal. Here are all these young kids heading into the lines, and they take us past a GI cemetery. And we could see the gravediggers working, burying GIs. A little sidelight on that. My wife's cousin was killed just about 2 weeks before I was there in a tank battle with he was in the 10th Army Division. And he's buried at Epinal. One of our sons is named for it. We went into the lines in the Heart Mountains, relieving the 45th Division. And that was the first that I had seen of gunfire, artillery fire, and death. We broke through the Siegfried Line on March 15th. The company I was with suffered very heavy casualties. In fact, it was withdrawn. Probably out of the 160 men that started through that minefield, we lost half. We hit the Siegfried Line and broke through it, crossed the Rhine at Worms, and from there on, my story begins. We're heading towards Würzburg, and we start seeing strange people in striped pajamas or smocks. Didn't speak German, broken German, and they were out literally looting as much as they could get food. And the deeper we got into Germany, the more we saw. We took Würzburg, we took Schweinfurt, and with the 3rd and 45th Division, took Nuremberg. At that point, I really became a forward observer. 3 of us sat in an attic in the town of Fürth overlooking Nuremberg. We had been stopped. There were gunfire across this river, and the infantry took some casualties, so they said, let's not do that. We'll shell them overnight and go in tomorrow morning. Well, we had the best OP, and all night the 3 of us took turns keeping the fires going in Nuremberg. The next morning we moved in, not a shot was fired at us. We were going down one of the streets, and one of the infantrymen pointed out, look at that broom handle sticking out that window. We realized that wasn't a broom handle, that was the barrel of a machine gun. A couple of guys ran upstairs, and sure enough, there were 3 Germans behind that machine gun, absolutely frozen from the artillery fire. They never fired a shot. We went a bit further and going through buildings to make sure they were clear. And a couple of us heard water running. We couldn't figure out what that was, on and off. So we went to check it out, and we found this woman, survivor, in a striped smock, sitting at the side of the bathtub, and she's reaching across, flushing the toilet. She has some German. I spoke pretty good German at the time. And I questioned her. She didn't know what that was. She had been a peasant from Eastern Europe. She had never seen a toilet before. Those were some of the folks we started to run into that were slave laborers. Gaunt. No hair. Like something out of a science fiction movie. Briefly, as we headed south towards the Alps, we were told we were heading for Munich. Well, we expected there was going to be a problem there. That was the bastion of the Nazi Party. But the road took us down. I'm just going to read something that I'm going to pass out that you can share. Thanks. It's here. There it is. If someone would like to pass these out a little bit. There's about 10 there, probably one to a table maybe. What you're seeing is the battle map, the actual one, a photograph of it. And on the bottom, towards the left, you will see the town of Dachau. And we came down that road. And by the way, that's the same map, the one one of my sons has it, and he won't let it go. So he let me take a photostat of it. I don't know why I ever kept it, and if you notice it's full. About 3 years ago, we opened it up, and you see how dirty it is on that face of it. When you open it up, the other part is clean, because that's exactly where we were coming down. And that's how we use that grid as fire direction. Well, we stopped at the town of Dachau for the tanks to load up with fuel, ammunition, and a little bit of rest. And the 3 of us decided we had heard over our radio that there was something going on at Dachau. So we drove over there, we had a couple of hours. We got there, we heard some gunfire. There was still gunfire within the camp. Well, we wanted no part of that. So I never did go inside the camp. We got there. Before we got there, we could smell it. It was the smell of death. We got to the camp, and I looked inside, and there were people sleeping on the ground. On closer examination, they weren't sleeping, they were dead. Strewn all over the place. From starvation or whatever. And there was a commotion. We looked up, and here are a dozen survivors chasing a German guard. A big burly man in blue-green joppers and boots. And they got him trapped against a barbed wire fence. And they were too weak to really confront him, but they were taking stones and rocks off the ground and stoning him. I will tell you, you never want to see a person being stoned to death. And we were standing on the other side of that barbed wire fence and saying to ourselves, what do you do? We were armed. But we would not fire on the survivors. And we walked away. I couldn't watch it anymore. We walked away. And I walked from here probably a couple hundred feet and heard a shot. I knew exactly what that shot was because it was an Army 45 pistol. And somebody was coming up behind us, and I said, what was that? He says, some GI inside there couldn't stand it anymore, and he shot the German. Put him out of his misery. And we still saw the evidence of death all through the camp. We came to a railroad siding. And on that railroad siding were 39 cars, open cars, box cars, and they were loaded with dead people. And to this day, I can smell it. 72 years later, over 72 years later. You can't imagine what it was for an 18-year-old to look and see 39 railroad cars loaded with dead people. What did that do to me? I was angry. I was hateful, bigoted towards anything German. I was not a good person. We carried on, went back and carried on through Munich, and not a shot was fired, and carried on to a place called Chiemsee, which is between Salzburg and Munich, and that was VE Day for me. A little sidelight. A day or two later, they brought up big tents, and Chiemsee was a lake. And they put up these tents, and for the first time since December at Camp Kilmer, we had showers. Well, you can imagine what we looked like after 6 months in the same uniform, no showers. We could frighten anybody to death just by looking at us or smelling us. It was something out of Bill Malden's comic strip. We looked like Willie and Joe. Some of us, after we got cleaned up, we didn't recognize each other anymore. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. In July, I got a call from my old lieutenant, who was now a captain, and I was promoted to the exalted rank of corporal. And he wanted to see me. So I went over to his new battery, and he closed the door, and he said, "Dick, I want you to do me a favor." Well, you military guys know that captains don't ask corporals for favors. Doesn't work that way, as you well know. It's generally, you do this, and you do it. And we were back to first name basis as we were when we were up at the front. And I said, "Jerry, why me?" He said, "I want you to take a GI from this battery up to Bremen, because he's a German, was a German immigrant, came to the United States in about 1935, became a citizen, and served honorably as a soldier, and he was a sergeant." I said, "Hey, come on. Corporals don't take sergeants anyplace." He said, "In this case, you're going to do it." And he's going to do it. We'll let these professionals do their thing. I said, "Does he know that a corporal's going to be taking him?" He said, "He will know, and if he wants to go, he's going to do it." The long and the short is, we did it. And he agreed. And I won't tell you about the trip to Bremen, which was very, very difficult at that time. Very little transportation, trucks, train for a little bit, and so forth. We got to Bremen, and we're standing in the plaza. And I said to him, "You know, I'm going to be a fifth wheel by going with you to visit your family. I'll stay here in Bremen, and you go and visit your family, and we'll meet here." And I looked around, and there's a Red Cross, British Red Cross. I said, "We'll meet on the steps there, or inside, depending on whether it's open or not." And he agreed. He said, "I'll be here." And he took off, and I'm standing there in this plaza. Now what do I do? Where am I going to go? And I look at the Red Cross, and I said, "Well, let's try there." So I walk in, and there's this stately older woman standing behind the information desk. I should add, she's about 30 years old, but she was an older woman to me. And I start speaking German to her, that I'm looking for a place to stay, and she turns towards me, and I notice that she has a gold chain around her neck with a Star of David. And I tell her what I'm looking for, and she thinks for a moment, and she said, "You wait here, I'll be right back." About 10 minutes later, she comes back. And she said, "I have a place for you to stay." And by the way, her English is infinitely better than my German. She comes back, and she said, "I have this place for you." And she takes me across the plaza to this church. And I'll pass some of these out too. And she says, "Now, these are the caretakers, this husband and wife, And by the way, to this day, I know their name, Herr und Frau Erich Stahl. Now, if you ask me what this woman's name is, I couldn't tell you, but I remember their name. And they took me in to their little apartment, which is about the size of, from the side of that screen to here and over. Couple little rooms, little bathroom. And they offered me their bedroom. I said, no, no. I said, I'll sleep on the couch. To get to the point, I discovered that they found this woman on the street outside the church one night about 2 years earlier, in the middle of the war. And they took her in and hid her in the catacombs under the church with the mummified bishops. I'll pass this around. They fed her with their meager rations, and I think you can visualize the time frame, maybe you can't, that if, I always say a secret is a secret when one person knows it. When two people know a secret, it's no longer a secret. But that couple kept the secret because they never knew who they were going to talk to, who would report to the Gestapo or the SS. And the net result in a hurry would have been either taking them to the plaza and shooting them or sending them to a concentration camp. But they risked their lives for this woman, shared their rations with this woman under the pain of death. A few days later, I met with my sergeant, came back, and as I'm going back to Austria, I'm thinking to myself, what just happened? What did I just experience? And I realized that what these people had done, and I quickly realized that not all people were bad. That there are good folk out there, regardless of who they are. You know, that's quite a lesson for an 18-year-old to grab a hold of. And for me, as I've thought of that over the years, I realize what a character change that did for me. And it's lasted, fortunately. And we try to teach our children that you don't have to like everybody. I'm speaking for myself. I'm not telling anybody in this room how to think. I don't do that. All I'm asking you to judge from my experience and take whatever you want from it. But we tried hard, and a classic example was, as Joan may remember, when the kids were in school, Bruce, my oldest son Bruce was maybe 7, 8 years old. He came home with the class picture. Do you remember the class pictures that when you were in school? And I asked him to tell me about the kids in that class, and the pictures a little bit about her. And he's going through them. And then he comes to this little girl, this African-American little girl. I can still remember the name, Linda Davis. And the first words out of his mouth is, "She's different." Well, I almost fell on the floor. What did we miss in our teaching that she was different? Fortunately, I asked the right question to follow. Normally you think about it, ask her, but I remember I had it then. And I said, "Bruce, why is she different?" And I can hear him say to this day, "She giggles all the time." And I came off the floor, I floated on the ceiling. And we went to the next child's picture. So as I talk to the kids and the children in Florida, and as I talk to them here in Massachusetts, I plead with them to take each and every person as that person. You don't have to like everybody. I put it this way, you like some people more than others. Bigotry, whether it's ethnic, racial, is something I have a big problem with. And that's why I do this. To relate the story of a German couple, Herr und Frau Erich Stahl, that would stand up and protect this woman for over 2 years under pain of death. No question about it. What kind of people were they in the midst of this? They weren't intellectuals. They were just ordinary people, caretakers of a church that did that. And I hope that this little message will resonate, especially in today's environment. It's more important today than ever. I want to thank you for your attention and for the invite here. There's nothing better than sharing Veterans Day with a bunch of veterans. Thank you.